Hello and welcome to our presentation, Week 9, as we look at an important topic, the topic of immigration, racism, and belonging. My name is Ibrahim, and with me are my presenters, Sarah, John, and Gillian. And let's dive right into our presentation and our exciting topic for this week. We begin by looking at the presentation overview. We had 3 readings this week, and they're going to be covered by 3 different presenters. The first one is on Immigrant Student Experience of Schooling, a Narrative Inquiry Theoretical Framework. And secondly, we close this week out with an interesting debate on educational achievement, an exploration between the links of education, migration, identity, with the research of Ogbu and the debate on educational achievement, the experience of the Somali students in their journey to belonging. As we look at the article, I see myself as a different person who has acquired a lot, a Somali female student's journey to belonging. So let's dive right in and have Gillian take it away for our first reading for this week, an immigrant student's experience of schooling.
Immigrant Students' Experience of Schooling, a Narrative Inquiry Theoretical Framework by Shu, Connolly, He, and Gillian. In this paper, the researchers use a narrative approach to study the educational experience of Chinese immigrants in Canada. The study focuses on one student of the Bay Street Community School, Yang Yang. The researchers provide a detailed account of snippets of Yang Yang's life taken over a 3-year period and present 6 insights into the immigrant schooling experience. The first insight the researchers put forth is that understanding the student's experience can help us better understand their educational experience. From the excerpts of Yang Yang's life, we get a fuller picture of the student and can see how his life outside of school has influence on his experience in school. According to Shu et al., while insights can be gained from reducing Yang Yang's experience to a set of variables, the rich details presented in the narrative provide life context that gives meaning to his school experience. For example, they speculate that Yang Yang's lack of close relationships led him to steal from his family's business in order to buy the friendship of his classmates. The second insight warns against the dangers of homogenizing cultures. According to 2004 data from Citizenship and Immigration Canada, Hong Kong and mainland Chinese immigrants to Toronto at that time tended to be middle class and professional. However, this is not the case for Yang Yang. He came from a rural area in the Fujian province. His parents have little education and are not wealthy. In the third insight, Shu et al. Argues that when educators assess a child, they need to look beyond the school and beyond the quality of parenting to the complexity of the child's life. Yang Yang's school life is structured, ordered, and divisible into time units and learning topics. However, his out-of-school life is marked by disorder and emotional conflict. His parents tried to get Yang Yang into a boarding school to address this disorder. The fourth insight looks at the implications of a model minority. The model minority myth originated in the US and claims that Asian Americans are academically and economically successful, particularly in comparison with African Americans and Latinos. According to Shu et al., this idea of a model minority has spread to Canada, and because of the perception that this group is usually successful, educational policy tends to focus on non-Asian ethnic groups. Even though data may show that Asians are among the top-performing minority group, the model minority myth is just that, a myth. There are many other factors that contribute to academic success. However, because this myth persists, Yang Yang and other students like him form a hidden minority who are perceived as not needing programs or resources to support them. Additionally, they may be viewed as poor representatives of their culture for not conforming to the model minority stereotype. In their fifth insight, The researchers propose that strong linkages need to be formed between homes and communities of immigrant students and the school. While efforts to accomplish this were implemented at the Bay Street Community School through their Parent Center, School Council, and children's programs, they have not always been successful, as in Yang Yang's case. They argue that more needs to be done to facilitate the co-education of new immigrants, both parents and children, and their educators. Throughout the study, the researcher Xi Jing acted as a cultural broker, bridging the gap between the immigrant families and the school staff. She understands both Chinese and Canadian cultures and was able to mediate between both parties. The researchers proposed that such cultural brokers could become cultural educators for immigrants and people who work with them. In their final insight, Xu et al. Highlight that Yang Yang's identity could be fragile. As a young teenager, he may be conflicted about his identity or identities. Having a Chinese identity was important to Yang Yang and his family. However, he faced negative attitudes from some people as a Fujianese. As a new immigrant, he may also be questioning his identity as a Chinese Canadian. From the 6 insights, we can see that the immigrant educational experience is shaped by factors outside of the school environment, such as the student's home life, their parents' education, their home culture and perceptions of it, the cultures in their schools and communities, and even their identities. As educators and administrators, it is important, therefore, to see our students as individuals shaped by a myriad of factors. Their classroom behaviors may be influenced by some aspect of their culture or something specific to their own life or situation. Educators and administrators also need to be wary of the dangers of homogenizing their students' cultures and experiences. In the rest of the paper, the researchers discuss why the narrative framework was used, the researcher Xi Jing's role throughout the study, and some key characteristics of narrative inquiry. The researchers believe that understanding the student's school experience requires a narrative understanding of students in relationship to their teachers, other students, parents, administrators, and communities. In addition, the details for the stories provide a rich resource for readers to interpret and make their own meaning relevant to the concerns they bring to the text. Xi Jing worked at the school for about a year before meeting Yang Yang in 2003. She observes and interacts with the students, parents, and teachers in the school, for example, in school council meetings, parent-teacher interviews, and school-sponsored events. As a result, she was able to develop a close working relationship with the school, parents, and students. She is invited into the homes, workplaces, and communities of the students and their families. As a cultural broker, she translates and mediates between both sides who view her positively. Through her participation in the school council meeting, she also confirms that Chinese parents, like Yang Yang's, view school education as a school responsibility, not a shared responsibility of the school and home. The researchers identified the following 5 key characteristics of narrative inquiry. Firstly, narrative inquiry is a form of experiential inquiry. This coincides with the phenomenon to be studied, Yang Yang's school experience. Secondly, narrative inquiry needs sufficient time to collect and interpret the field texts. The text collected from the interviews and interactions over the 3-year period allowed the researcher to develop an understanding of the participants and so enable her to construct plausible interpretations of the data. Intensity refers to the researcher's commitment to explore events or experiences in terms of time, sociality, and place. For example, through intense discussion with Yang Yang's mother, Xu makes connections between Yang Yang's education and his mother only completing grade 4 in Fujian. In narrative inquiry, the researcher is not just an observer, but a collaborator. Numerous examples can be seen of Shu's participation and involvement in Yang Yang's education. Finally, narrative inquiry requires following leads. Generally, there is flexibility in the research. In the case of Shu, she started by working in the parent center, and her leads took her into parents' homes, businesses, and the community.
This is reading number 2, G. Batty on Ogbu and the debate on educational achievement, an exploration of the links between education, migration, identity and belonging as seen through the lens of migrant families in the UK and Europe. Let's start by taking a look at where Britain's immigrants historically come from. We have some old data here that looks at the top 5 origin countries of British immigrants from 1951 to 2011, and you can see in the more recent years there is a higher number that come in from the countries of India. In this article, the author argues that a combination of greater understanding of diverse needs and dedicated effort to confront racism in schools and society is needed to avoid the risk of failure, underachievement, and disenchantment. The desire for a better life leads families to migrate and resettlement in other countries, many of whom face challenges of identity and belonging, specifically South Asian children in pursuit of education. Ghazala Bhatti looked at some of the issues raised by Ogbu in relation to the education of different minority ethnic groups and the value attached to education. Just take a moment and try to imagine the range of mixed emotions that are present for new immigrants to any country that is not traditionally their home. So in the article, the author compares Ogbu's experience of black students in the American system excluded from the more desirable social and occupational positions because of their caste, with the academic success of children from migrant families in the UK and the rest of Europe. All Western societies where migration has taken place are involved in some form of mass education. Though risky, it is here that new futures are formed while others are dismantled. In this article, the author draws upon some research findings on South Asians in Britain and also the situation of Muslim communities in Europe, with the aim of drawing together some issues which are linked to a desire for education, a success of new immigrants, and links to the future. The desire for education. Each family of South Asian heritage migrated to Britain for a different reason. An opportunity to work and a better life were two of the more popular reasons. As visible minorities, they were initially viewed as different and often challenged as they attempted to retain cultural traditions while trying to get an education. South Asian parents wanted and still want an education that equips their children with the opportunity to compete in the British job market while at the same time maintaining their links with their home. With Britain a new home, the new migrants found that Britain's monocultural and monolingual teachers were challenged teaching migrant students and were not culturally sensitized. Educators were unaware of the sacrifices families had made and also the parents' cultural and emotional investment in their children's future. These new students were provided with minimal educational guidance and unable to navigate the educational system that would lead them to participate in college or universities whose credentials offered more job market value. This traditionally meant that some degrees led graduates into gainful employment while others led working class young people, including young Muslim women who fought hard to get an education, to less desirable employment. Success of new immigrants. When it comes to minority ethnic communities, research evidence in Britain presents a case of Indians and Chinese doing better than white students at school leaving age, while Pakistanis, Bangladeshis and African Caribbean students are underachieving. African Caribbean boys experience exclusion from schools more than any other group, and this has been linked to racism prevalent in society and amongst teachers. Indeed, the existence of institutional racism has now been publicly acknowledged in the British law after the murder of a young black teenager by the name of Stephen Lawrence. There's a link included on the slide. If you take a look at it, it's a very interesting article. So, when discussing marginalized groups, issues with schooling can get complicated. However, if ethnicity and color are relevant, why do Indians succeed where Pakistanis and Bangladeshis underachieve? Would poverty explain this? If it is religious barriers that affect the ways in which children meet each other and work together in schools, why is it that Pakistani and Bangladeshi children who are predominantly Muslim underachieve as do Caribbean boys whose cultural and religious affiliations are not identical to those of Bangladeshi or Pakistani students? Links to the future, a sense of belonging. There is a type of social capital which minority ethnic communities are not prepared to forego. It is tied to faith and belief in some communities. When there are institutional moves to absorb and silence a community, or if a community feels that an oppressive move is afoot, there is a reflex action, a collective move to retain cultural capital through whatever means necessary, including the maintenance of identity through religion and setting up faith-based schools. Recent events such as the aftermath of September 11th and the London bombings in 2005 and the Iraq War, together with other unresolved matters in the Middle East, have all come together to reopen questions about Muslim identity and Muslim consciousness among young people and their families in Britain. Take a look at this image and be interested to hear what you think. This image serves to represent the fear of the Muslim community. Islamophobia, a word first used in print as early as 1991, defined as unfounded hostility towards Islam and therefore fear or dislike of all or most Muslims. Identity. When communities feel not accepted, they begin to find different ways of coping with new challenges. In Britain, until fairly recently, most Muslim children went to school with children of other faiths or of no faith. However, there is now a growing debate about state-funded Muslim faith-based schools. So, will Muslim schools produce reactionary, disenchanted youth? There is said to be an unease among educators of different persuasions that British government miscalculated the possible consequences of allowing Muslims to set up their own schools. However, the deeper troubling question of academic failure and underachievement is worrying. Muslim boys, both Pakistani and Bangladeshi, are currently underachieving in schools, so does this justify state funding for separate schools for Muslim boys and girls? And will separate schooling solve underachievement? Acceptability. The story of the headscarf or the hijab in France fueled a debate in Britain. Two perspectives. One, was it just a piece of cloth? Or two, a symbol to be interpreted both as a sign of confidence among young women and a symbol of defiance and identity. Gender issues seem to be at the heart of the matter. So are these young women oppressed, or should they be allowed to wear what they choose and be allowed to express themselves as they wish? A number of questions. However, the bigger question here is, should this have an impact on social acceptability or social mobility? Here's another image that kind of represents the voice of immigration, racism and belonging for many new immigrants to Great Britain and across Europe. New identities. What young people are not prepared to do anymore, especially in the second and third generation of South Asian families, is to play out the victim image. They do not want to feel pathologized or pitied. If they do not feel accepted, they will do their own thing. Other young people will begin to work with who they are with confidence and courage. They will carve out a place for themselves and with it form a new identity. With the rise of Islamophobia, there is a quiet reaction amongst Muslim youth. A return to religion might give some a sense of belonging and security. If it leads to self-exclusion from the wider social issues, there will be greater division than those that currently exist among different minority ethnic communities, and that would indeed be a lost opportunity for society as we move forward with a view of full inclusivity. Batty's article left us with the idea that inequality, racism and intolerance has the potential to increase the risk of disengagement and fracture. There is an ongoing need for greater understanding and more dialogue and respect if we are to enable all young people the opportunity to achieve that which the future demands. With this in mind, the creative energies of young people and belonging must be tied to and become essential for productive educational outcomes. As a takeaway from the article, in your opinion, what are the benefits to having separate schools for different religious or cultural groups here in Canada, as they do in the UK and across Europe?
The third article we will highlight is I See Myself as a Different Person Who Has Acquired a Lot, Somali Female Students' Journey to Belonging. The article examines the impact of religion and language on school lives of female refugee students from Somalia. Immigrants and refugees are faced with many challenges as their culture and worldviews collide with those of the host country. Schools are the primary location where adolescent newcomers are exposed to the dominant culture and therefore play a detrimental role in shaping adolescent newcomers' identity. Structural characteristics such as race, religion, language, gender, socioeconomic status, and sexual orientation play an important role in the perceptions people have on newcomers and their expectations. The author chose to examine religion and language, firstly due to the fact that many Somalis are Muslim in faith, and secondly because many Somali students do not have prior exposure to the English language. Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world, yet Somali refugee students are subjected to racial and religious biases. These biases have heightened as a result of the terrorist attacks of 9/11, having increasing impacts on the negative experiences of Muslim students. One of the most challenging aspects of Muslim girls' school lives is navigating their ethnic and religious identities in their host country. The cultural dress code in specific emphasizes difference and is at the center of discrimination for many of these girls. Many Somali students discuss the misconceptions or stereotypes they encounter as a result of wearing the veil, including the belief that the veil symbolizes inferiority to males. While these stereotypes resulted in some Muslim students to take off their veils, scholars also found that it resulted in many acts of resistance, where Muslim girls would challenge these stereotypes to ensure that Islam was positively represented in their schools. Students' experiences with English language learning have become a growing area of study, as these are essential to students' social and academic experiences. Many researchers have found that the classroom does not adequately support ELLs, as students do not engage in English communication, cannot understand instructions, and rarely find a supportive individual to aid in language acquisition. While ELLs may develop oral language skills, it is extremely difficult for ELLs to develop English language skills that are essential to becoming academically successful. Many ELLs are subject to marginalization because of their accents or misuse of language. Despite these challenges, the author argues that the immigrants must learn the dominant language in order to be successful. The findings presented within the paper are part of a larger study that relates to how immigrants and refugees construct their academic identities. The study consisted of 7 Somali refugee students who attended an urban high school in the USA. Intensive observation and focus groups were the primary data collection method. The students were observed in classes, hallways, the cafeteria, and participated in group interviews. The findings from the study were broken up into 2 key themes. The first is the students' experience with religious discrimination and their responses, and the second deals with students' perspectives of learning the English language. All of the students shared that they faced religious discrimination in the school setting. Some of these experiences included being asked what's under their scarf, students trying to take off their hijab, being compared to terrorists, and being asked about Osama bin Laden. Students stated that they were treated differently because of their religion, and sometimes it seemed that people were afraid of them. Students responded to religious discrimination in 3 ways. The first is active confrontation. A student shares an example of when she was asked about Osama bin Laden, and she responded with, "How am I supposed to know? I'm going to the same school as you, wake up in the same neighborhood as you. It's just crazy." Students used this method to stand up against people who were speaking badly about Islam and attempted to inform them on the real meaning of Islam. The second is passive responses. Some students felt that it was easier to just ignore the discrimination because she knew that what the students were saying about her religion was not true. And the third is using humor. One student who had the same name as a dictator would joke that he was her grandfather when asked by her peers. None of the participants had experience with the English language prior to coming to the U.S. Although students encountered many struggles while learning English, they used resources from within their ethnic community and school to support their language learning. Some students relied on other Somali students, older siblings, or parents to help them communicate in school and learn English. All but one of the participants found it beneficial to have a Somali-speaking classmate. One student found that when she had someone to translate, she had no reason to learn English, and being isolated is what actually forced her to learn. The students also made mention of participating in English language lessons in schools, using computers, after-school programs, and friends as methods of helping them learn English. The participants found that the language only caused challenges initially, and worked hard on the language, accents, and learning slang expressions to fit in. In conclusion, the findings of the study exhibit the experiences of Somali female refugees from an initial state of not understanding the culture and language to developing methods of combating religious discriminations and methods of improving their English language skills.
And this concludes our presentation. We thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Delete that crap. And this concludes our presentation. We thank you for taking the time to view our video, listen to our content, engage with the reading, and we look forward to hearing your opinions, thoughts, and insights as we dive further in this week's presentation on Thursday. Looking forward to some great discussions, and we look forward to having you with us in class as we take this further in the breakout rooms. See you guys Thursday. Have a great week.